Let's not forget what this is about. 90 people a day die from gun violence in our country. That's 33,000 people a year. One of the most horrific examples, not a block from here, where we had 9 people murdered. It's reality. And it has been heartbreaking and incredibly outraging to see the constant stories of young men like Walter Scott, as you said, who have been killed by police officers. There needs to be a concerted effort to address the systemic racism in our criminal justice system. And that requires a very clear agenda for retraining police officers, looking at ways to end racial profiling, finding more ways to really bring the disparities that stalk our country into high relief. 1 out of 3 African-American men may well end up going to prison. That's the statistic. I want people here to think what we would be doing if it was 1 out of 3 white men. And very often the black men are arrested, convicted, and incarcerated for offenses that do not lead to the same results for white men. So we have a very serious problem that we can no longer ignore. Lester, you're right. Everywhere I go to campaign, I'm meeting families who are affected by the drug problem that mostly is opioids and heroin now, and lives are being lost and children are being orphaned. And I've met a lot of grandparents who are now taking care of grandchildren. So I have tried to come out with a comprehensive approach that, number one, does tell the states that we will work with you from the federal government, putting more money, about $1 billion a year, to help states have a different approach to dealing with this epidemic. The policing needs to change. Police officers must be equipped with the antidote to a heroin overdose or an opioid overdose, known as Narcan. They should be able to administer it, so should firefighters and others. We have to move away from treating the use of drugs as a crime and instead move it to where it belongs, as a health issue. And we need to divert more people from the criminal justice system into drug courts, into treatment and recovery.
And that's time.
So this is the kind of approach that we should take in dealing with what is now a growing epidemic. Question, and congratulations on 5 million viewers on YouTube. That's quite an accomplishment. Look, this election is mostly about the future, and therefore it is of greatest urgency for young people. I've laid out my ideas about what we can do to make college affordable, how we can help people pay off their student debt and save thousands of dollars, how we can create more good jobs, because a lot of the young people that I talk with are pretty disappointed about the economic prospects they feel they're facing. So making community college free, making it possible to attend a public college or university with debt-free tuition, looking for ways to protect our rights, especially from the concerted Republican assault on voting rights, on women's rights, on gay rights, on civil rights, on workers' rights. And I know how much young people value their independence, their autonomy, and their rights. So I think this is an election where we have to pull young people and older people together to have a strategy about how we're going to encourage even more Americans to vote, because it is absolutely clear to me that turning over our White House to the Republicans would be bad for everybody, especially young people. Just follow up on that, Anderson, because when I think about capitalism, I think about all the small businesses that were started because we have the opportunity and the freedom in our country for people to do that and to make a good living for themselves and their families. And I don't think we should confuse what we have to do every so often in America, which is save capitalism from itself. And I think what Senator Sanders is saying certainly makes sense in the terms of the inequality that we have. But we are not Denmark. I love Denmark. We're the United States of America, and it's our job to rein in the excesses of capitalism so that it doesn't run amok and doesn't cause the kind of inequities that we're seeing in our economic system. But we would be making a grave mistake to turn our backs on what built the greatest middle class in the history of the world.
Disagreement between us on universal coverage for health care. The disagreement is, where do we start from and where do we end up? The Republicans want to repeal the Affordable Care Act. I want to improve it. I want to build on it, get the cost down, get prescription drug costs down. Senator Sanders wants us to start all over again. This was a major achievement of President Obama, of our country. It is helping people right now. I am not going to wait and have this plunge back into a contentious national debate that has very little chance of succeeding. Okay. Let's make the Affordable Care Act work for everyone. Rachel, I think I may not have done the job I should in explaining my record. You know, I did when I left the Secretary of State's office, like so many former officials, military leaders, journalists, others. I did go on the speaking circuit. I spoke to heart doctors. I spoke to the American Camping Association. I spoke to auto dealers. And yes, I spoke to firms on Wall Street. They wanted me to talk about the world, what my experience had been as Secretary of State. But what I want people to know is I went to Wall Street before the crash. I was the one saying, you're going to wreck the economy because of these shenanigans with mortgages. I called to end the carried interest loophole that hedge fund managers enjoy. I proposed changes in CEO compensation. I called for a Consumer Protection Financial Bureau before it was created. And I think the best evidence that the Wall Street people at least know where I stand and where I have always stood is because they are trying to beat me in this primary. They have collected and spent as much as $6 million on these ads. Hedge fund billionaires, Karl Rove, another billionaire, jumped in. And why are they doing that? These are guys who try to make smart investments. They know my record. They know me. They know that I say what I believe, and I will do it. And I also have a pretty good understanding about how to stop them. So I do want people to know that. And I think it's important for everybody to understand I have a record, I have stood firm, and I will be the person who prevents them from ever wrecking the economy again. I do. And, you know, what I hope the Supreme Court will do is make it absolutely clear that any state that continues capital punishment either must meet the highest standards of evidentiary proof of effective assistance of counsel, or they cannot continue it. Because that, to me, is the real dividing line. I have much more confidence in the federal system, and I do reserve it for particularly heinous crimes in the federal system, like terrorism. I have strong feelings about that. I thought it was appropriate after a very thorough trial that Timothy McVeigh received the death penalty for blowing up the federal building in Oklahoma City, killing 168 people, including 19 children in a daycare center. So I do, for very limited, particularly heinous crimes, believe it is an appropriate punishment. But I deeply disagree with the way that too many states still are implementing it. So if it were possible to separate out the federal from the state system by the Supreme Court, that would, I think, be an appropriate outcome.